Welcome back, everyone, to Afrodo Reviews. And on this channel, I help you decide. Sorry, she threw me off. Is that book worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? That's what we're here to decide. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. Today's book is Primordia 2, Return to the Lost World, by author Greg Beck. Published in May 14, 2018, this is the sequel story to Primordia 1, The Lost World. Much like the first, there isn't too much to speak on in the background of the book itself, but I will talk about my own personal history with the book. You see, Primordia 1, The Lost World was one of my first ever videos I did on this channel. I think it was actually number 5, the 5th video I ever published, coming right after Magic Kingdom for Sale. I may have mentioned, but I probably didn't, that I had the 2 sequels to the first Primordia as well in that video, and plan to review them eventually. Well, it's only been 3 or 4 years, but I finally got around to it in this month of forgotten sequels. But enough blabbering. Here's your report card. And now let's move on to the cover. Well, I had it in person. I misplaced it somewhere. Still don't know where. I'll get back to you where I find it. Yeah, I'm a little disappointed in the cover. It's sort of similar to the first one. It's sort of becoming a brand with the series, which has a consistent style of cover throughout. Typically, it's showing what I assume is our protagonist, and whatever special forces gear that he's supposed to be part of, standing on a ledge and overlooking the prehistoric world, seeing the prehistoric wildlife in its natural environment. The problem I have with this cover is that, looking at it, you would never know the story takes place in the exact same area and jungle as the first book, which covers look like this, by the way. The use of oceans, plesiosaurs, and pterodons give the impression that this story is going to be set closer to the sea. You'll even see on the back of the book, if you own a physical copy, that the book invites you to explore the deep seas with it on an adventure. The problem is, it's generous to say the sea is even a background setting that's relevant to the book. So everything on the cover is all about a very small background event that occurs within the book in a flashback, but nothing else. Meaning the cover of the book is largely pointless to the overall story. Now, I'll give it some credit in that maybe this was just to help differentiate it from the first book, to give it a cooler color palette with the blues instead of the greens of the first. But I've maintained this throughout my entire time doing this channel. I think a cover needs to reflect something within the book that it's based on, because covers can set up expectations of what's going on. So, speaking of that, what's the synopsis of this book? Well, it's a sequel. Ordinarily, I would recommend checking out my first video to get a basic idea of what the first book was about, but I made that video like 3 years ago when I was very new to the YouTube. I was a very different person then. I want you to watch it, don't get me wrong. I will still be linking it in that little bubble thing that appears. I just can't in good faith recommend it because I was not as proficient with editing back then. I didn't have as good of a mic. I did not have as good of a camera. I wasn't as good at writing out scripts, so it was very rambly. Yeah. So anyways, here's a quick and dirty synopsis of the first book. 10 years ago, Ben Cartwright and his high school sweetheart, Emma, along with their friends, who honestly don't matter, discovered that Ben Cartwright's ancestor, who he was named after, may have discovered the actual Lost World, written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Deciding to play into this a bit, the group decides to go on this global adventure, more or less just working with a flight of fancy. But on this adventure, they discover that Ben Cartwright's ancestor actually did, in fact, discover a real-life lost world. And it can only be accessed once every 10 years, when a comet called Primordia passes over the Earth. and thins the barrier to allow people to pass into it. And like all good stories that deal with a giant predator, they get picked off one by a giant evil dinosaur, while a human antagonist also basically screws them over any chance he gets. And ultimately, it ends with Emma escaping and Ben staying behind to save her, with the implication that maybe he survived, maybe he died. You'll never know until you read the sequel. Now, 10 years have passed and Emma is ready. Collecting a crew of Ben's old military team, a brother-sister paleontologist duo, and a pair of Venezuelan reporters who force their way onto the team, Emma is ready to go back to the Lost World and recover Ben. And she's willing to sacrifice as much money and lives as it takes. Now, honestly, I would read from the back of the book, but it just feels better to do that, tie it into the main thing. Plus, it basically gave you the exact same information that the back of the book gives you, and a little bit more. The back of the book is ultimately fine. As I've stated before, like with the cover, the back of the book does set expectations for what people want, and I think this one sets the expectation just good enough, which both entices a returning reader and gets a new reader interested. No complaints overall. So anyways, how does the sequel hold up? Well, older viewers of my channel might remember that when I read the first book, I admitted that I picked it up because it looked kind of dumb. I mean, the artwork, the premise, and the writing on the initial pages, it all screamed to me like it was going to be this rewrite of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Lost World. Instead of some nerd writer and his scrawny professor, you got this badass Navy SEAL with guns and explosions, kicking ass and taking names. I was pleasantly surprised that I found a book that wasn't really that, but was actually pretty enjoyable on top of it. Yes, it was very cliche, and I still had a lot of problems with it overall, but I think it was a very enjoyable read for what I was expecting. What I expected to get from that book was what I got in this book. Yeah, as unfortunate as it is, Primordia 2 is the dumb schlock I was expecting when I read the first book.
You're hit. You're bleeding, man. I ain't got time to bleed.
Now, don't get me wrong. There are improvements in this book. The pace is a lot tighter, as I was just starting to hit the point where I got bored, like with the first book, when they finally end up in the Lost World. So unlike the first book, there was never a point where I was just reading and I was like, come on, just go already. In addition, initially our main cast is a lot more interesting on the premise. Now don't get me wrong, they aren't well characterized, and I'm not saying the author uses them well. And you can clearly tell who's going to be there just to be fodder to sell the danger. But the first book was worse. I could actually tell you some things about most of the characters in this book, whereas I admit I don't remember any of the names of the characters from the first book that aren't Ben and Emma. Like, I don't remember any of those characters. I can't tell you their friend's name. I can't tell you the villain's name. I can't tell you anything. Don't worry. It seems like this book doesn't remember them either. Because as much as Emma ruminates on the failed expedition that occurred a decade ago, we see them name drop 2 people from the expedition. And it's like these were their childhood friends who were viciously mauled by a giant snake. And they like, all they can focus on is the expedition was a failure, but I'm gonna go back for Ben. And really, on that one, I'll get to that later. But I think with characters like Andy and Camilla, the characters that were pretty well rounded, that did make me interested to see what would happen to them once they get in there. Drake Benton is a fine enough for what he's meant to do, and Emma and Ben still have characterization in between them. Now, most of the Navy SEAL squad, I'm just going to call them Navy SEALs, it never says, but most of the SEAL squad, they're just caricatures, but they're good enough for what they're serving to do. And I will say, unlike the first book, there was never scenes in it that feel like they weren't supposed to be in here. Like maybe they were meant to be cut out, but were left in. All the scenes in this book, while not necessarily all being relevant to the main plot, at least are meant to enhance characters or the plot. We never get a scene where they, like from the first one, where Ben got caught cheating on Emma and nothing happens. Literally, Emma's not even mad at him in the next scene. It never comes up again. It was largely pointless. But for all it does do better, unfortunately, it still does most of the same things and honestly does worse in a lot of aspects. It still does that thing where some chapters are a page or half a page long, and then others are almost 20 to 25 pages long. Now, this creates a weird stuttering effect for me. It gives this book a weird feel where the chapters are either flying by too fast or the chapters feel like they're dragging. There's no consistent pace to each chapter. It's nowhere near as bad as the first book, where I think one chapter was just flat out like 35 pages long. But it was definitely noticeable. I also definitely noticed that this time around, the prose and the grammar, they're way worse. Like, I'll have to read the first book again to see if maybe I just forgot it or was really generous to the book. But I genuinely don't remember the first book having such bad writing. For example, this is the first sentence you can find in chapter 2. Emma alighted from the taxicab and stood out in front of the striking building and admired the magnificent sculptures and ornate stonework of the great artist and sculptor Francisco Nevares. Oh my god. This first sentence is not only a run-on sentence, but overuses the word "and" to the point that it starts to get noticeable. And writing is like this throughout the book. At first, I was actually sure this meant Grieg Beck was a non-native English-speaking writer, right? Because if you read this and you look at it as, oh, maybe this was translated, all of a sudden, a lot of these little quirks, oh, this makes a lot more sense. But as far as I can tell, the author is Australian. And as much as we joke about the Aussie accent,
I'm not trying to be a hero, but the police are coming. And he just decided he'd scoot up the road, and I just said, nah, it's not going on like that, mate. So I jumped in my car, and I started chasing him up the road, and then he went down.
They do actually speak English. Now, this includes typos, and several sentences are formatted very weird. At one point, a struggling character tells another, just damn swim, instead of, just swim, damn it. Or, damn it, just swim. An important thing to do if you ever want to be an author is to occasionally just stop and read your lines out loud and see if they sound right. See if something can always sound much better on paper, and you only realize how clunky or weird it sounds once you try to say it out loud. Or this one time in the book where the author states that something is flying overhead that could have been bats. Problem is, he uses the phrasing like the characters didn't actually get a good look at what it was before it passed. But then he proceeds to describe the characters plainly and, even acknowledged in the text, describes nothing that looks like a bat. Seriously, when even your own text says that they are bats and only that they have leather wings and clumsy flyers, maybe rethink the first sentence? Also, the way the characters talk, or I should say, they began to drive me wild. At one point, another character wakes up Emma from a nightmare they're having, and they say, no exaggeration here, nightmare much? Or another character sees something amazing and says, holy wow. It's just, holy wow. It feels like it's writing for like a kid's movie, you know? Like instead of saying, holy shit, they have to say, holy wow. Or the nightmare much feels like it's outdated millennial speak. It honestly doesn't even feel like millennial speak. We're talking like it feels like almost like Gen Alpha speak, you know? In addition, while I do stand by that there are no pointless scenes that don't enhance the characters or the plot at all, there are a few irrelevant scenes. The difference is, pointless means it doesn't do anything, irrelevant means it just does the same thing over and over again. Almost all of Ben Cartwright's chapters before he climbs the Tepu and waits for rescue are largely irrelevant. They're clearly meant to show how Ben survived and struggled with his isolation, but none of his chapters really do much more than show Ben as a battle-hardened survivor, which is something we see already when he rejoins the group, or we already knew from the first book. There's also, did we really need to know about his shark best friend? Like, I get that it reinforces his loneliness over the 10 years, but the shark best friend is... it's not like Wilson from Castaway or anything. It's just a shark he talked to for like a couple months and it got eaten. And that's it. That the shark never comes up again. He doesn't ruminate on the shark. He doesn't act like the shark's talking to him. We don't see him, putting actual human emotions on the shark or anything like that. We don't even know that he climbed down to the sea or any of that. It's all largely stuff that happened, and it does go to show how hard it was for him to survive, but it's not relevant to the book. But I think in order to really get the scope of where things went wrong in this book, I'm going to spoil. So, reader beware. From now on, we're in spoiler territory. So, anyways, there's a number of story decisions that just annoyed me, At one point, the story keeps trying to go for suspense, cliffhanger-style endings to chapters on various perspectives. Once, when Burton Cartwright is crawling along as he's trying to get to the spot he thinks he's going to meet Emma, he's suddenly leapt onto by a predator. His weapon breaks, and the chapter ends with him realizing that he has no way to fight it off as the predator's nails dig deep into his chest, and he, for all intents and purposes, is dead to rights. Later, the group find his broken spear and a lot of fresh blood, too much for a human to have lost and survived. This splits the group as Emma refuses to believe that Ben is actually dead, while the rest of the group is sure that this means he's gone. After all, the weapon clearly was his weapon, and there's a ton of blood around now, right? This would have played really nicely into genuine conflict, as the reader themselves has to decide, well, is Ben dead? Or do we hold on to false hope? Do we hold on to the hope like Emma, even though we don't know for sure he's not? Except the story ruins that for us, because before we even get to the point where Emma and the group find the weapon, we already know Ben's still alive, because we cut to a chapter from his perspective as he's crawling away, thinking about how he was saved from that predator by a bigger predator that picked up and ate it.
There's always a bigger fish.
And Brett just doesn't seem to have a sense of dramatic irony. No, he doesn't know how to effectively use it. He doesn't use it here either to maybe show us Emma becoming increasingly convinced that Ben might be dead, only for us to know he's alive and urging her, no, keep going, you're right. Or the group to start to leave him behind, ready to head back, only for Ben to catch a glimpse of them and is too injured or is unable to call out because there's a predator right in front of him, forcing Ben to be the one to bridge the gap before they leave him behind, knowing that now Ben has to get to them because they're going to leave him behind. The problem is it doesn't work like that because Emma never doubts Ben is alive, and at most this is just a convenient way to separate the characters so Beck can kill all of one group and spare the people in the other group. Seriously, that's what he does, and it drove me insane, because how Beck, even though these characters had a lot more promise than the first one, how Beck actually uses them is awful. This leads us to the other time that the author tries to leave us in suspense. At one point, the group splits in two when, they find the thing. Technically 3 different groups. The team that goes with Emma goes to hunt her down a little bit after they broke off, thinking, well, we can't leave her behind. And the group that returns to the potential way out and tries to clear it of an infestation of titanoboas, which was the main antagonist of the first one. Now, the group clearing the titanoboas basically have the giant red death flag waving over their head, because the second they walk away, they're gonna die. Because none of the main characters are part of it, and the asshole character is. But I'll be honest, I didn't expect him to kill the entire group off screen. Mind you, this group is 75% of the cast. Seriously, this last chapter ends with the reveal that they plan to use one of their own as bait, and it fails because the titanoboa sneaks up behind one of them. And when we meet them again, the only survivor just tells us, oh yeah, they were all killed. The problem with this is it just doesn't work. The author is clearly gearing up the titanoboas to be the final monster, the climax of this story. So obviously the snake control group wasn't going to succeed in clearing them out. So by cutting away from them for so long, I immediately drew the conclusion that, oh yeah, well, they clearly all just died. Instead of thinking, oh my god, Did they get out of that? Did they survive? I mean, I really doubt the author was going to have our main characters roll in during the climax just to find the rest of the group sitting on the snake corpses like, yeah, we totally won that. Not a single casualty. But that leads me to my other major complaint. The waste of characters that it has. Like I said, the characters in this book are much more interesting than the last book are at the start, but they're used far less. Ignoring Emma, who the author wants you to see as smart and determined, but does such idiotic things, like telling the group of mercenaries she hired that are contemplating leaving her behind, that she already paid them, so they don't have to worry about getting her back, even though that was the only thing keeping the asshole from leaving her behind. Or that time she expresses shock someone figured out she was planning to go to the Amazon, despite the fact that she's meeting with people in Venezuela to talk about the Amazon, and hiring armed mercenaries to go into the Amazon, and spending thousands of dollars planning a trip into the Amazon. Also, seriously, here's another question on this. Why did it have to be a secret? Everyone knows she claims that dinosaurs killed most of her friend group in the Amazon, and she made it no secret that she thinks Ben is still alive in there. So why would she need to keep it a secret that she plans to go back into the Amazon to look for him? That's never explained. She just treats it like it has to be hush-hush or it's in danger. Anyways, back to my original point. One of the characters you have is Ajax. Now, he was clearly being set up to be the asshole character. You know, the one, not quite a villain, but enough of a problem that he might as well be one. He's an opportunistic, selfish bastard who only cares about himself and almost shows a sadistic disregard for the others. Now, in stories like this, he's the one who keeps getting others killed and is the one who opposes the main character most often when they present very reasonable, logical things to do. And he does. Off screen. It's a gruesome death, but he just fights it. He's not shown he's wrong about Ben's survival. We don't even see him cross any kind of moral event horizon. Heck, all of his worst actions actually kind of just have a veneer of reason to them. Him pulling a gun on Emma to force her back with him makes perfect sense. Not only is he trying to protect her, but what would it look like if Emma took a group of 4 heavily armed individuals into the jungle and only the armed individuals came out? The problem with Ajax as a villain is he hadn't done enough bad for me to buy him as a villain. Therefore, his gruesome death at the end doesn't really satisfy me as an ending to the character. He was selfish, yes, but a villain? Not quite. This also ties into the Venezuelan reporter group. Now, setting aside the fact that this is the second book that has a mostly white cast with all the POCs suffering immensely, seriously, what is up with that? In the last book, the Venezuelans were mostly shown to be thieves and thugs, with the tour guide being the most gruesome, drawn-out death in the book. But in this book, both native Venezuelans are supposed to be opportunistic, vulture-like reporters, and the Venezuela cameraman gets mauled by a pterosaur, his wound infected and oozing pus within a couple hours of the mauling, and he gets fed to some kind of groundworm which tears his flesh out for a bit, survives that just so he can be used as live bait for the titanoboas, which doesn't even work before he's gruesomely killed by a snake. Oh, and if you don't believe me, if you think I'm making too much of this, let me put it this way. The Special Forces group that Emma recruits has 4 people. Fergus, the Irishman, Drake Benton, the white guy, Ajax, who's also white, and Broke Anderson. Broke Anderson's a black man. Now, using only that, which of these guys do you think dies first in the book?
I seen this movie. The black dude dies first. You snag it.
Back to my point. If you ask me, the Venezuelan camera crew should have been our main characters. Camilla is played as a vulture-like reporter who's constantly belittled and mocked throughout the book because she did the crime of not believing Emma's story about dinosaurs killing her entire friend group. And Ben being trapped in the past in a prehistoric land that's only accessible once a decade when a meteor passes over. Can you believe that? That's the most believable story in the world. She's on the other side, believing that Emma left her group to die and wants to find out the real story. So she muscles her way into Emma's expedition in order to discover the truth. Camilla would have been an amazing focal point because not only is she the most non-expert in the group, but she's the only one who actually has stakes to a character arc. We know that she isn't necessarily malicious. She does genuinely believe that Emma left her friends to die. And the moment Emma is proven right, she drops the attempts to smear Emma right away and wants to focus on just getting home safely, along with her friend, the cameraman. Imagine if we told the story from her perspective. Not only would it be great to create a new entry point for new readers, it would play into the dramatic irony as well, as Carmela thinks Emma killed and ditched her friends in the Amazon. And yeah, on the outside, Emma's story is batshit insane. It would be a great way to show how Emma changed from who she was to who she is without just outright telling us like the book does. It would also leave mysteries to unfurl as we go. Except, no. Again, the story treats all of the abuse thrown at her as justified because she doesn't believe Emma's story, and is useless to a survival setting. Literally to the point that Ajax, the asshole character, as I mentioned, outright verbally assaults her when she's the sole member supporting his plan to just cut and run. Because yeah, that makes sense. The one person who agreed with me that we should leave as soon as possible. Now, shut the fuck up, you stupid bitch. No one wants to hear from you. Dude, that's literally pulling out a gun and just shooting yourself in the foot. And just like Fergus, Ajax, and Juan, dies a horrible death off screen, with no conclusion to her character dynamic with Emma even closing to approaching an end. After she arrives and sees that Emma was never lying, there's one scene where Emma looks at it and says, "Still think I'm lying?" And that's it. That's it. That is it for that character dynamic. The rest are just more or less there to die. Juan, the other native Venezuelan, just gets abuse thrown at him from all ends. Again, having his arm mauled by a flying dinosaur, it gets infected within little hours of the bite, to the point it's oozing pus down his arm, despite being wrapped. Getting snacked on by a flesh-eating, blood-sucking worm when they try to have a small rest, and then, again, being used as live bait for the Titanoboa. Literally, he's just there to get shit on. Fergus and Broke may as well be labeled Disposable Soldier 1 and 2. Helen and Andy are interesting. Now, to give credit, Andy is by far my favorite character. One of the only people who sees this portal into the prehistoric past, not like a portal into hell, but a portal into this dream. This is what he wanted to see as a paleontologist. He loves being here, even after seeing how dangerous it is, and all he can think about is, do you know the amazing things we could learn here? But his sister Helen just doesn't have a personality. Honestly, I have no idea why she exists. I was positive that she was gonna be the hysterical one who everyone treats as the load, but she doesn't even get the dignity of that. She doesn't die. She doesn't have any freakouts. The nicest thing I can say about her character is she was there. Okay, and there's one thing I do want to comment on when it comes to this. Okay, so the last book, the science of what was happening wasn't really delved into. From the most part, if you read the first book, at least how I remember it, the Tepui that comes out every 10 years when Primordia passes over, I thought it was sort of hinting that the media was creating some kind of gravitational pull that was causing the Tepui to just rise just enough that people can climb into it and find this lost world. Sort of like a journey to the center of the earth sort of deal, you know? But, no. Because this book just flat out confirms it's time travel. And, look, time travel is a very common storytelling thing. But, there's not a single time travel story I can think of that doesn't have plot holes. And it'd be one thing if the story was just embracing how dumb the premise is, like the first one did. But this one is taking itself a little too seriously to do that. And it goes out of its way to repeatedly, justify the time travel. So as time went on, I'm just kind of just asking questions about the time travel. So with it being time travel, how does that work? So is time flowing concurrently to itself? Does when Primordia pass over, it always opens 10 years from when they last were there? Because that has to be how it worked for Ben. because he lived there for 10 years and then Emma and them showed back up. It's not like, in Ben's perspective, he was only there for a couple days and Emma and them came back. He was there for 10 years. So obviously time has to flow concurrently, right? But at the same time, if it flows concurrently, how does it still open to the prehistoric era? Primordia has been passing over us for centuries now. So you would think, like, not even a century, Primordia has been passing over us for literally thousands of years. So perhaps even millions. So why is it still opening to that point in time? Why hasn't it moved on to a new era or anything like that? Why is it opening specifically to that era? And to throw further wrenches into the thing, later on, Andy even theorizes himself. So do you think it always opens up exactly 10 years afterwards, or do you think that maybe it like opens different time periods? Like what if it opened 20 years in the past from where they came in last time? Or this next time it opens up 100 years to the past. But like that doesn't make sense because things also escape down into the jungle. Also, another question, because it's a time bubble, now you have to explain, hey, how did these animals just not escape and go live in the modern day world? Well, technically some of the snakes do, and that was their explanation for those gigantic anacondas in the Amazon. But also no, because there's this specialized like membrane over the tepui now that prevents the pterodons from just flying out, but for some reason also doesn't prevent the snakes from escaping, or anyone from going in, or people from flying in. So what? I don't think the author should have tried to explain it and give it the time travel explanation. I think he should have just left it where it was, because now it just makes me ask questions. But I guess overall the story just really did not live up to the small legacy that the first book had set for it. And at the end of the day, it's like a 5 out of 10. Yeah, it's not really offensively bad. It doesn't do anything so bad that I'm like, wow, this ruined the series. I'll probably still pick up the third one and read it eventually. But it just, like I said, this book was definitely what I expected of the first book. This is exactly what I expected, which if I had read this one first, I actually would have had a lot of fun with it. But because I read the first one first and actually enjoyed it, when I came into this one expecting to actually enjoy it, I ended up not liking it because it is what I thought it'd be, if that makes any sense. But yeah, it's not bad. It's not offensively bad. I won't even tell you not to read it if you want to read the series. It's kind of boring. Like, there are definitely parts in here that you'll have to read number 3 because of something that happens at the end and forms the next book. But that's it. I can't even really summon up anger about it. It's what I thought it'd be. But if I'd read the first book first. With that being said, just remember, with every book comes an adventure. And every adventure is worth having. Even the bad ones. See you later, everyone.